What's up, y'all? Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show, brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. My name is Dustin Jones. This is Wednesday. That means it's Jerry on Ice, where either myself or my partner in crime, Christina Previtt, will talk about all things older adults. We teach the modern management of the older adult curriculum. That's the 8-week online class, Essential Foundations, as well as Advanced Concepts, as well as the 2-day live course. Christina, Alan, Alex just got back from Baton Rouge this past week and had an awesome time. Our 2020 is getting packed. If you want us to come out to your neck of the woods, I would reach out sooner than later. We're already booking into 2021, which is pretty exciting. Today's Wednesday. That means it's also Hump Day Hustling, so you all have likely just received a lovely email in your inbox from Jeff Moore. That is something to not be missed. So if you don't get that email, go to ptonice.com and sign up for that. So today's episode, what we are going to focus on is continuing the series Beyond the Berg. So 2 weeks back, if you didn't watch that or listen to it, I did an episode talking about how can we assess people's balance capacity in a more thorough manner, rather than the standard functional measure that we may do, like the Berg balance score, for example. How can we go beyond the Berg, and what do we need to look at? So in that episode, I talked about, we have to tease out some of the different components of balance. And I broke it down into basically 3 parts. The inputs that we receive, which is the visual input, the proprioceptive or somatosensory input, the vestibular input, the central processing that happens, and then the outputs as a result via the neuromuscular system. We have to tease those out to really see where deficits lie. And typically with many older adults, it's not just one area. It may be many. It may be a few that we can accommodate for, potentially improve upon, not always, and maybe be able to compensate as well, to give us a thorough game plan to be able to help people. So last time we talked about that, as well as really testing those visual inputs. Just for review, visual acuity, so the sharpness of vision, contrast sensitivity, depth perception, and then visual field restrictions. I went through how to actually assess that and mentioned a very helpful app that you can have on a tablet that's going to make that a whole lot easier. So today, what we are going to talk about is testing those other inputs. Now, for those that are listening, I would highly encourage you to go to the Facebook post for this video, especially for those on Instagram as well. I'm going to be posting a bunch of links that will show you practical videos of how to do some of these things I'm going to talk through, and I'll try and make this as audio friendly as possible. So we've already tested vision like we talked about. Now let's go on to kind of the vestibular piece. Now the big thing to realize is that to really test the inputs of that vestibular system, our gateway into the vestibular system is often the eyes. That vestibular ocular reflex and the movements of the eyes really will tell us a lot of what signals that vestibular system is actually providing. So we can do a few things via looking at the eyes and how they behave in these different tests to see the vestibular function. The first thing, before we kind of dive into that, we really want to really dive into some of the symptoms that folks have, especially if someone has issues with balance. They may say they're dizzy, they may say they have vertigo, the spins, whatever it may be. We need to dig into that to really understand what that is, because folks will use terms and they may be trying to say something that means something differently. So lightheadedness, for example, you dive into that. Are they literally feel like they're going to faint? Do they get the tunnel vision when they change positions? When does that lightheadedness happen? What's the behavior of that? Similar to how we talk about the symptom behavior model in more of the orthopedic realm. But dig into those terms. Is it actually an orthostatic hypotension issue that they're talking about, a blood pressure issue, or is it something else? Maybe it is something like vertigo, that illusion of movement where it feels like the room is actually spinning. Dive into that. Is it disequilibrium, where they have the sensation of just being off balance? Is it oscillopsia, which is basically, if you think of a handheld camera home movie where you're walking forward but it's kind of bouncing all over the place? That is oscillopsia. So the inability to stabilize gaze while the head is in motion. That's typically indicative of some type of bilateral vestibular disorder. So dig into what they're experiencing, if they're experiencing anything at all, and then we can look at to determine if there is vestibular dysfunction. So how you want to think about this is some very quick and easy screens to kind of determine, is this a central nervous system issue, or is this more peripheral, in the peripheral vestibular system? So think of the labyrinth for peripheral, and in terms of central, think of kind of the brainstem and the cerebellum as well. So some things that you may see in the periphery, BPPV, very common. A lot of us see this or experience this with our patients. Meniere's disease is another one, vestibular neuritis, perilymphatic fistula, and acoustic neuroma. I would say Meniere's and BPPV are going to be most common. They behave very differently. We're not going to dive into that for this podcast. Then the central issues that you may see, ischemic disease, MS, very common, cerebellar ataxia, Parkinson's, seizures. The big thing with the central nervous system involvement that may be picked up with some of these visual tests, you're also going to see other symptoms as well, other signs that you may find in your neuro exam. Okay, so typically you're not going to see the dysfunction with these visual tests in isolation. You'll see it with other things that happen. All right, so let's go with the central screens first. All right, so I'm just going to go through this list. Once again, I'm going to be posting links that will show you very quick videos of what this looks like in practice. So first, spontaneous nystagmus. So this is involuntary movements with the eyes. This is not always pathological. However, we want to determine if it is. So what you're typically doing is having them just fixate on one spot. So whether that's your nose, whether you put up a pin, preferably I like to use something with a bright tip that'll be a little easier to locate, and they're just doing that fixation. You're seeing if there's any wiggle of the eye when they're just trying to maintain that fixation point. Then there's a gazed evoked nystagmus. So that is where you're going to move the object in different directions and you're going to stop occasionally. So keep looking at the tip of this pin. I'm going to move it in different directions and I'll stop occasionally, and I'm looking at the eyes the whole time to see, is there any bit of nystagmus or that involuntary eye movement, and also which direction it's going. Is it an up beating? Is it a down beating? Is it just going laterally? Just pay attention to that. The big thing with this one, the gazed evoked nystagmus, is you don't want to go all the way to end range. You want to stay kind of in the middle of their visual field and just be moving and then stopping periodically. So you're looking for that nystagmus. You also want to do a smooth pursuit. So typically you do an H pattern. They're not moving their head, they're just moving their eyes, and you're doing the H pattern going up, over, up and over, and I'll typically use this pin. A lot of the patients that I'll do this with, they want to move their head. They have a tough time stabilizing their head and then tracking with their eyes. So you want to give that cue, but observe how difficult it may be for someone. And then I want you to think about how that translates to a complex environment. For example, when they're walking across the street in a grocery store, how difficult it is to be able to maintain a stable head position, but then also be able to scan their environment. Think of how that impacts their performance. So that's some information you can get there. Also, saccades or saccades, I've heard it said different ways. Probably like pecan and pecan, I'm sure. But that is where you are telling them to go basically from one object to another quickly. So I'll typically have a pin, and then I'll say, look at the pin when I say pin, then look at my nose when I say nose. And I'll go nose, pin, pin, and I'll change the pin in different directions. What you're looking for is, are they able to shift the direction and not overshoot or undershoot, that they are going to that one spot and staying right there with pretty precise accuracy, and not necessarily having to move their head, but they're just moving their eyes. That's what you're looking for there. If they're having issues with those tests, so the spontaneous nystagmus, the gazed evoked nystagmus, the smooth pursuit, and the saccades or saccades, however you want to say that, that is more indicative of some type of central nervous system issue. Now the peripheral stuff, the fun stuff that a lot of us typically can have a bigger impact on with folks, and that is the vestibular ocular reflex. So first off, we start pretty slow with this. And what this basically is testing is that reflex that the vestibular system is sending to your body, your central nervous system of, hey, this is what the head's doing, and the reflex is what the eyes are able to do to accommodate. So first you have someone fixate in one point. So typically this may be a nose, it may be this pin as well. They're going to flex down to about 30 degrees. All right, this is where your positioning may be important. If you tell them to look at your nose, you want to make sure you're a little bit lower. So if they're on the therapy table and you're sitting on a stool, that's usually a pretty good place to be. In home health, I've found that I just end up using the marker because it can be difficult to get in that position. So they are going to be turning left and right about 30 degrees, not all the way, but just 30 degrees, and they're fixating on the tip of that marker or your nose, and they're going left to right. And so if someone is having issues there, they're typically not going to be able to do that well, to be able to fixate. You'll see them start to blink a lot, or they may complain of some of those dizzy or vertigo-esque symptoms. And then I typically will tell people, see how fast you can go, and see how fast you can go before you start to lose your inability to fixate on that marker, pin, or nose. And so that can give you some helpful information. And then you can do a rapid VOR. So this is where they are fixating on one position. So I will typically do the nose for this one because you're going to need both hands. And you take both hands kind of on either side of their cheek, and you are rapidly turning their head left to right. This is challenging from the sense of so many of my patients tense up. It's very difficult for them to relax to allow me to do that movement. So it'll be a lot of coaching saying, okay, relax, we're not going to go that far. I'm just going to turn your head back and forth a tiny bit, and I'll start a little bit at first and said, okay, now that we got that, let me move it a little bit more. Okay, we're good. Now I want you to stare right at my nose as I do that. And you're watching their eyes' ability to continue to fixate on your nose as they're turning their head left to right. They're still flexed at 30 degrees, keep in mind. That's going to give you some information on how that VOR reflex is happening. And then last but not least is the head thrust maneuver. So this is where they're starting right in front of you, looking right at you, looking at the nose, 30 degrees of cervical flexion, and you have your hands on their head, and you're starting from the middle and turning them away. Turning them away. You go to both sides. So you tell them to keep looking at my nose, and then you turn their head quickly to the right, see if they're able to fixate, and then do the same thing to the left. And that's going to give you an idea if they're functioning well. View these as screens, okay? If you are seeing an issue there with some of these screens, that is a trigger to further assessment. I would encourage you, take a vestibular focused course that dives very deep into this. However, most clinics, usually someone on your team, this may be their specialty. So if you pick up on this, don't just ignore it. Don't just say, okay, whatever, let's just get this person stronger. Get them stronger and try and address or even compensate for some of these deficits. Okay, so that's testing those vestibular inputs, gives you a good idea, when you may need to refer if it's a central or peripheral issue. Now let's rule or assess the last piece of those inputs in terms of balance capacity, and that's the somatosensory system. So there's three main things I want to mention very quickly that you want to get an idea of, because it's going to impact your person's ability to acquire some of that sensory information that's going to help them stay upright and have that good balance on their feet. So the first thing that I want to mention is the lovely Sims-Weinstein monofilament testing. So you can get the single use, which may not be the most cost-effective thing. However, you can get them usually for $150 per, and they'll come in packs of 25 or 50. But it's typically that 5.07 strength, if you will. And what you're doing, and there's a nice little graph on here, you're basically testing different points of the plantar surface of their foot, 9 points typically. So starting at the big toe, working across the toes, and then working posteriorly or inferiorly, depending on the position of the patient, down to the heel. And so if you see any deficit or find any deficit where they're not able to feel that monofilament, then they're having some issues with sensation. Typically with many of the folks that I work with, diabetes may be on board, some type of neuropathy, something to think about there. That's going to impact their sensory inputs. It's going to impact their balance. So very easy to do. I would highly recommend you all grab some of these. Another one is joint position sense. So this is a very simple one you can do with the big toe, where you're grabbing the big toe on either side and you are basically moving it up or down, and you're asking them to say, is this up or down whenever I move it. So what you're trying to see there is there a pattern where they are consistently getting this wrong, where they're not able to sense the position of that big toe, and that is going to be very valuable for your assessment and also your interventions to understand that this person doesn't have a great awareness of their foot in space and likely their lower extremity as well. You can test the different joints as well, the ankle and the knee, but the big toe is a great easy screen to do initially. And then last but not least is vibration sense. Vibration sense is highly linked to risk of falling. If they don't have a sense of vibration in their feet, then the risk of falls goes up dramatically. And the easiest way to do that is with a good old tuning fork. Slap it against your thigh, put it on that distal phalange or big toe. And what you're looking for is you ask them, tell me when you stop feeling the vibration, and you're holding the tip of that tuning fork, and you want them to say, I don't feel it anymore, whenever you don't feel the vibration either. So you want them to be pretty much at the same point. So that's how you want to do a quick screen of the somatosensory system. And this is something that you want to have in your wheelhouse when working with older adults and to go beyond the Berg. So next, we're going to talk about kind of the processing piece of how is the body doing, and bringing all these inputs together and putting out those outputs to maintain that center of mass over the base of support. That's all I got for you. That's a lot. Check the links in the Facebook post, and we will continue this series in about a couple weeks. Y'all take care.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.